This is the Food and Justice Podcast with Brenda Sanders. In this episode, I'll be speaking with LoriKim Alexander, founder of the Cypher organization, about her experience as a child growing up in Jamaica, what it was like doing food relief work in the Bronx at the height of the pandemic, the commonalities between the treatment of cows in the dairy industry and gendered violence against women, and so much more. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the Food and Justice Podcast with Brenda Sanders. I'm so pleased to have my guest here today, LoriKim Alexander. I am just so excited because LoriKim is doing amazing work and actually one of my favorite people and someone who I consider a friend. So I want to just tell you a little bit about LoriKim and then we'll jump right into the questions. Originally from Kingston, Jamaica, LoriKim Alexander has dedicated her life to working for social and environmental justice, specifically organizing around justice for LGBTQIA Black, brown, and Indigenous communities. LoriKim's work in anthropology and as a trained biologist has facilitated her in centering initiatives around environmental racism and for the implementation of environmental education for people of color around indigenous ecological knowledge and decolonialism through veganism for the past 25 years. Having lived in different parts of the U.S. for 3 decades, LoriKim now resides in New York City, where she continues her work as a facilitator and organizer in an effort to ensure the creation of spaces that center the most marginalized. Wow. Just wow. I mean, that was a mouthful. That is a lot of really, really amazing and important work. Thank you so much, LoriKim, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to talk to you today.
Yes, yes. And I mean, our schedules have just been just all over the place. And so it's been like work getting us together. So I am just so honored and, just happy, just overall happy to have you on here.
Mhm.
So I want the audience to hear just a little bit about like your life and who you are and how you came to be who you are, right? So, what was your experience like in growing up in Jamaica? And then what was it like adapting to the States?
Got you. Um, so I love my country. I love Jamaica. You know, People come to Jamaica to relax for a reason. And a lot of times people are like, oh, people are on island time, right? So time is different there. It's just it's slow and easy, but life isn't easy, right?
Mm,
So even if you have it's still you still feel kind of cut off from a lot of the more polished things that you see. And I say polished as in, you know, what we tend to take for granted here in the United States. Um, and so, they think food is real food. I when I moved here, I stopped eating fruit. I did because the fruit
yes.
didn't taste right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out that it's force ripe, meaning that it's picked green and then they put a chemical on it to ripen it, and it's ripened as it's in transit. So by
Wow.
the time it gets to you, it kind of ripe, but it's not ripe by the sun.
Yes.
And so I feel as though that's how I was, growing up as a black child in a black country. There's a level of freedom that you may not even know you have until you don't have it.
Mm,
And so I feel like people are ripened by the sun. They walk like they grow out the earth.
mm.
And I would say very privileged to have the mother that I have. Because she knew everybody, like all
Oh,
types of people, So I grew up around writers and artists and musicians, and thinkers, and we were also friends with, the liquor man down the road who makes brooms, and,
Mm.
the the farmer who grows our food as well. And also, she made it a point to have us be able to travel around the country.
Mm.
That I feel like is not something that everyone in Jamaica could have. So I was very lucky to be able to see my entire country and, live at the beach.
Mm. Mm.
We
Mm.
lived in the countryside for a little bit. And so we lived on the top of the mountain. And I spent my entire summer running down the mountain to the beach. And you had to run
Wow.
because
Oh
you
my
don't wear shoes. And the ground is hot. And so if you don't run, you burn your foot. So I'd run down and run straight into the ocean,
Mm.
and so those are some of my happiest moments. Coming to this country, a lot of times too, people come here and say, well, we came here for a better life. I feel like what happens when a lot of us come here, from the Caribbean, from around the diaspora, from the motherland, making it to the diaspora, we lose a lot of ourselves, not
Mm.
only our culture, our melanin. I lost some shades,
Wow.
because the sun doesn't hit the same.
Right. Oh
No
yeah.
matter where you are in this country,
Mm.
the sun just doesn't hit the same. The pollution is here, and then also, the pollution of what it means to be Black. So you come here, and all of a sudden, Blackness is this thing to be vilified, that people are either afraid of, or that they want to subjugate in some way. I had never experienced that. I didn't understand that. And so as a 13-year-old child, that was a hard reality to face, and when I did face that, I think that galvanized, my commitment to not having anyone else have to go through that,
Mm.
to fighting against that,
Mm.
and to realizing people's personhood. And when I say people, I mean all people, non-humans too, yes?
I do
Um,
know. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. I can't even wrap my head around any of that. I can't imagine growing up in a Black country. Oh my gosh, just
right?
seeing yourself reflected back to you everywhere. Like that in and of itself is just so momentous, like to even think about for me. And then like the freedom of not being vilified every moment. I can't even I can't even imagine. And then to have to come here and experience, I can't imagine. Like, wow, I'm gonna have to sit with that for a minute. I mean, that is really, really profound. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
My
And
goodness.
I mean, I want to add too that, it's not roses, right? I mean, let's just be real.
Mm-hmm.
Colonialism, like colonization, is a nasty, many-pronged, rooted thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it takes generations upon generations to get that out. So there's still problems there. There's colorism, there's classism, you know. So let's not, I don't want to romanticize what it is, right? Um, but there is a big difference
Yeah.
when you know that every shade of person you see is Black.
Mm.
There's a very big difference.
Yeah, I can't even
Hmm.
imagine. I really can't. So, you have been vegan for 27 years. I mean, like you're in the quarter century club. I'm almost in the quarter century club. Tomorrow, I will be in the quarter century club. So, um, you, but the difference, that I've seen, in hearing your story is that you became interested in veganism out of a concern for animals. And I hear that from, different folks, but what I hear the most from people who I work with is like, I'm concerned about, this health problem, that health problem, this thing, that thing. And I've heard that, eating plant food is going to solve all those problems, or potentially solve those problems. And so I don't hear a lot of stories from the folks who I'm working with that says, look, it started with the way that animals are treated. Can you tell me about that? Because that is fascinating and I am intrigued.
Okay, first of all, can we stop and just take a moment to say tomorrow? Tomorrow is your vegan anniversary?
It is. It
Yes.
is. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Let's
Thank
big you
you.
up for a second. Just, that's a beautiful thing. I love it.
Thank
I love it so
you.
much.
Thank you.
And I know you went through your own struggles getting there.
Oh,
So,
yes, for sure.
right. So I just wanted to make sure we took that moment.
Thanks.
Um, but yeah, so I was really politicized through the animal liberation and environmental justice movement.
Mm,
Growing up in Jamaica really influenced that because, you know, I'm my one child to my mother and father, just me. And so I spent a lot of time by myself outside.
mm,
I had a glorious grandmother who was a gardener and a teacher and just a genius in her own right,
mm,
right? And just a humble genius, not even knowing it, right? Like many of our elders are. And so would show me all the plants and animals and tell me what each thing does. And I didn't realize that until recently talking to my mother, and I was like, oh yes, yes, my grandmother,
mm,
we call her moms. Moms taught me that.
mm.
Um, and so what I grew up spending time with my friends were spiders and I know spiders and you know, lizards
Wow.
and ants and um, here I think they call them ant lions. They make the little burrows in the ground.
I do
Um,
not know that. That's an insect.
that's an
I
insect,
don't know
and
that one.
they're fascinating. So we could talk about them forever. But because they walk like backwards, and this is very strange. Anyway, so I used to play with them, and them, and the trees and shrubs around and flowers, and I would watch them for hours. My mother has pictures of me at 2 years old watching grasshoppers, and she
Mm,
said I would just sit in the grass. I would crouch in the grass and watch them for hours. And I remember just being in awe of that beauty. And any other non-human that I'd come across, we'd be friends right
oh.
away. Dogs, cats, goats, cows, chickens, not so much pigs because a lot of times, those pigs are penned a lot more than other animals. And that's just because they're broke out. It's what you said, like they have a mind of their own, they do what they
Oh,
want, you
okay.
know? Yes, pigs are very forthright. They do what they want. Um, and so, but in any case, I remember being living in the country, and we were going to pick up a cake at some Miss Lady house, right? And we're going there, and my mother and I drove up, and were immediately greeted by a goat that was
Mm.
strung up, all fours,
What?
strung up. Yes, on the side of the house. The goat was bleating for their life. And we were freaking out. I was, oh my God, they're about to kill this goat. My mother hurried up and tried to get the cake before they slit this goat's throat. And I'm
Mm,
sorry for being very graphic, but this is the reality, yes?
mhm.
And she didn't make it in time.
Oh no.
So I was there as a child, 6 years old, 7, and I saw that. And I never ate goat. I never ate goat even before that. I definitely wasn't doing it after.
Mm.
And that brought the realization to me. I hadn't made the connection as a child at that point. Even with fish, like it hadn't made the connection. I'd seen them being killed, but I didn't get it. And it still sat with me. But you don't know that there's another reality available as a child.
Yeah.
Then coming to this country, I started to meet a lot of folks, as a 14-year-old child. And as I was meeting people and reading things and magazines and things, I was like, there's another way. And there's people fighting and believing what I believe.
Mm.
Wait a minute. Because I was always the odd one out for saying, but these are people too. They
Mm.
have lives, they have whole families. They have a whole communication system. Because remember, I've been watching them, just sitting there
Wow.
with them in space, holding
Mm.
space, right? Interspecies space with them. And nobody was listening. And so then to be in these spaces where people were talking about the fact that non-humans are sentient beings, talking about the fact that non-humans are being subjugated in ways that is unjust, and talking about the fact that there's another way to live, eat, work in the world, and it instantly clicked. And so I went vegetarian first and was still in the movement, doing little things. So I remember I was like 14 years
Yeah.
old, 15, and so, I'd be doing phone banking and, things like that. And flyers and, I'd be in meetings, but nobody was listening to me because,
No.
who's this black child? You know, like, who this loud black child? Um,
Oh.
and so anyhow, I still though was kind of instilled with this idea that a better world is possible, another world is possible, and seeing these people like doing real on the ground work, right? Um, and so then after a few years, I'd started to feel like, oh God, I stopped eating eggs, but it's still like the cheese and the milk, you know, because again, remember, I'm young, so I'm still learning, first of all, how to cook, and then also what is accessible. And at
Mm.
that time in
Mhm.
the early 90s, there was not a lot that was accessible.
Yeah.
And then we are taught to really love dairy, right? We're taught that dairy is good for you, and
Mhm.
people make things with dairy so that it tastes better, right? Um, then I read an article um, in an animal rights newsletter, and it was written by a dairy farm worker.
Mm.
And he was talking about just the violence, the disease,
Mm.
the filth, and then what he had experienced himself to his body. I said, right. So, yes, I'm a hypocrite. I can't do this. And so I stopped. And this is, again, I'm not calling vegetarians hypocrites. Don't get upset, y'all. I'm saying at the time, that's how I felt. Yes. So I made that conscious decision at that moment to go vegan. And it wasn't a hard lift for me.
Mm.
It was an automatic thing. It was an all or nothing thing, you
Mhm.
know. And I really haven't looked back.
Oh yeah, I mean, I often tell people who are going through our programs or taking classes and workshops and stuff, if there was one thing I could tell myself 24 years ago, I would say, girl, don't even worry about it. This is the best decision that you're ever going to make. You will not regret it for 1 second.
Right.
It's just like you just think that it's going to be a way bigger deal than it ends up being, once you make that transition. So I can totally relate to that. Food and Justice is made possible with support from Defund Big Meat, a grassroots effort to encourage strategic collaboration across all sectors of global justice. Find more information about Defund Big Meat at www.defundbigmeat.org and A Well-Fed World, an international hunger relief and food justice organization advancing plant-based foods and farming to create a nourished and climate-friendly future. Find out more about A Well-Fed World at www.awfw.org. Thank you. So, getting into some of the, because you're doing a lot of work on different fronts. Just speaking of some of your like food justice and vegan and plant-based eating activism. You are on the core planning team of a festival called Black VegFest. Which I still have yet to be able to make it to. My co-organizer Naja, who helps to co-organizes Vegan Soul Fest with me, she's been up twice. And so I'm just like, every year I'm just like, oh yeah. So I just knew that 2020 was gonna be it. Like I was definitely gonna come, and then here come Miss Rona messing everything up. But yeah, I am actually excited about going this, in the coming year. I just I feel like I want to experience more veg fests because I feel like that will be, it's just like a part of the process of being an organizer is like going to other ones and experiencing other veg fests as well. And so I was super excited when Black Veg Fest like came around because on the one hand we just need more of that, like when Naja and I set out to create an event that would be fun and engaging and informational and uplifting and all these things in our community, we just automatically knew like a festival just brings all those things together. And so I was super excited, but I was also like, really, because when, there was some controversy, right? About the whole concept of a Black Veg Fest. Can you talk about that at all, and like how that controversy ended up being handled in-house?
Yeah, sure. So Omowale Adewale is the person who conceived of it. But are there were three core organizers at the time. Omowale Adewale, Nadia Muib, and Francis Pena. And they made that run. Three people.
Wow.
Now, I will tell you something that I know because of the work you do at Soul Fest, and also don't feel bad. I haven't made it to Soul Fest yet. So we just gotta work it out.
We did.
But most of the volunteers that they got were Black women.
Wow, big surprise there.
Right. We're shocked. We're shocked beyond belief. So Black families make the world go round. So yes. So the reality is that there was no controversy for Black people. Black people, right?
Yeah.
We're like, oh, finally. That was the response from Black people. Yes, bet I'm coming. That was the response from Black people. Only controversy came when white people were like, well, can I come? The response from non-Black people, let's just say non-Black people in general, is usually, why it gotta be Black? Like, why it gotta be Black is because y'all are so white. Let's just be really real. And so I want to make sure also that I set the record straight. I didn't start organizing with Black Veg Fest until like 2019. I've been there for all of that, for all the iterations, working with them, but not on the core organizing team until I was asked at that time. So, I know that they had a lot of pushback. I mean, foolishness. Like, issues getting permits, issues getting, the police asking to move the stage like a few feet or inches, like, making sure this fire lane isn't blocked when there's no issue, like foolishness, right? And it's a consistent pushback from governmental agencies because of the systemic racism that exists, that is undeniable. Even after, the way that we look at things now, folks are very quick to say Black Lives Matter, but do you actually actively make sure that you are centering Black people in the work or in anything? No. And so there's still pushback. There's still an issue. Well, what about this? What about that? So they had to field so many little annoyances on that side. And then, in articles that come out about Black VegFest, what happens? You look at the comments, sickening.
So bad.
Sickening.
So
I think there was one article, I think it was a Mercy for Animals article, something like that. I remember going there and I was so excited. I was like, oh, look, Black VegFest all over the place. You look at the comments, it was like, this is a racist event. Oh, for real? You know what's racist? The fact that for literally decades now, you've had events where no Black people were invited to speak, vend, or you have made it particularly difficult for Black people to speak or vend because you ask them to speak and give them no money and no transportation. You ask them to vend at high costs, knowing that our businesses are often small, right? And they're not small just because we don't have the skill set to make them large, right? They're small because of the roadblocks that I have mentioned, and so, acting like Black people haven't been vegan for, centuries. Acting like we haven't been here helping to make the movement for the decades that it's been here, right? So I think that it's just ridiculous to even that it would even be a question. Why can't we have Black spaces, Black things, Black spiritual joy imbued in everything that we do? Why can't we have it? If we specifically name it, then it's a problem.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And also, let's just say that nobody said just because it's Black, y'all can't come.
Right.
Just realize who's centered, right? So, and there's some spaces where you shouldn't come. Let's just also be clear about that,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we could talk more about that later, but yeah, this is the reality that, a lot of us, and a lot of these same people talk about white supremacy, like, oh, yes, we have to dismantle white supremacy. Well, start with yourself. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, because otherwise you just talking now. It's lip service. And that never did anyone any good.
It's so interesting because the same folks who have a problem with a concept like Black VegFest don't seem to have a problem when Black people are all but excluded from their spaces, whether it be your community, whether it be your kid's school, whether it be, the dance lessons or the whatever, that you have going on, like there's never an uproar or outrage about the fact that they can walk into a space and be surrounded by nothing but themselves, and there's no sense of like something is wrong here. But the moment that the excluded folks actually come together and create something, amongst themselves for themselves after having been excluded, right? Now it's a problem. Now it's like, well, I'm not being centered.
The truth is that we are generous people. We're very generous people, and we will always share space with folks who need it. But ask yourself first if you need to be there.
Mm,
If you're supporting Black people, do you need to actively, physically be in our presence to do so? And that's the reality.
mm, mm. Because there's a lot of ways of support.
Absolutely. You have funds.
Mm-hmm.
You could put us in front of funds. You could talk about us. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot write horrible reviews for no reason.
Thank
You
you.
know?
Right. Exactly. Whew. Okay. Wow. We have made some progress here. We're just getting started.
I know I started. I love
So,
talking to you.
I want to talk about the North Bronx Collective because, during the pandemic, the North Bronx Collective really stepped up and became like a resource for the community. And so can you tell us about the North Bronx Collective and then how you all ended up being in that position?
Sure. So, a group of us who are, educators, artists, scientists, you know, community activists, community organizers, um, we kind of sat down one day in a restaurant. We're like, these are the things that need to happen for community. We're watching redlining actively take place in our communities as people sell the air rights above people's buildings to shade them out,
Mm,
privatizing the near botanical gardens up here in the Bronx, trying to sell off pieces of that,
mm,
hiking up the cost of tuition at CUNY and over policing students
mm,
at specific CUNY schools more than others, but over policing in general, other things like that. And then the pandemic, you know, really became a reality. And as we're talking through things, we realize folks are very hungry out here.
mm,
The all of the aid, it's not reaching to people in the North Bronx, and so what we did was we started just really extra super grassroots, just calling in our people, and we
mm,
started like this group chat, and we were doing active direct, um, you know, direct procurement of food for people. Um, First, we started out just raising funds to give folks a gift card to the local supermarket.
mm,
And we went to the school, to one school in particular, where, at the schools is where they were giving out food. But we realized that they only did that certain times a day. And you had to be able to go to the school to pick up said food.
right.
And then the food that they were providing wasn't culturally relevant, wasn't great food, and just oftentimes wasn't enough.
Mm,
So we were providing these gift cards, and then we realized, after being connected with people through that action, that people were asking, please help me. I need groceries. Please help me. I've got housing issues, because landlords were taxing people now. People are losing their job because of COVID, and the landlords are like, I don't care. I
mm,
still need rent, you know or not fixing issues in the building because, oh, it's COVID, we can't get to it, but oh, it's
mhm,
also COVID and people now have respiratory issues because there's mold, because there's pollution, you know because the building is literally crumbling,
mm,
several things like that. Folks experiencing very serious conditions at work where they're not provided PPE. They now have to go buy a mask. You know, packs of masks weren't available. There was no PPE to be had in anywhere around the Bronx for a while. That was not like super expensive.
mm,
Seeing things like $15, for hand sanitizer and spray, and then you can report those people to 311, which is like the number that you call to report infractions and things
mhm,
like that, and
mhm,
complain about city issues. So like a crack in the sidewalk, let's say. or your landlord, but who is staffing the phone there? Not very many people. And then also, are they actively going to go and fix the issue in time for you to get what you need? No. So it was huge problems. Going to the supermarket, you don't even really have anything on the shelves. So we're realizing too, we're trying to buy food for people, and we're not able to get it to them because it's not on the shelves, a lot of it. So people calling us who are sick and can't get out the house. So we were just shuttling around. We partnered with Chili's on Wheels for a while.
Nice.
And they were able to take some of our folks, but sometimes they were just overwhelmed. They're like, we
Oh
can't do
yeah.
it.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
can't do it. Because they're going to the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, every borough. They just all over it,
Mm.
you know, tirelessly. I'm in awe. So in any case, and then also for me, it was hard because a lot of the stuff that folks are requesting is not vegan. A lot of the people in the collective at the time weren't vegan. And I was just like, listen, I can't do it. Let's have this conversation. And so as a collective, we decided that, you know, um, everybody can eat vegan food. And it's the most healthy food, especially during a pandemic,
Mm.
you know. We so we started to provide vegan meals, and as well as partnering with World Central Kitchen.
Oh.
Um, then we realized that they were supporting ICE, um, by feeding them when they don't
Mm.
need it, and other agencies that we're looking to abolish. And so we divested from them and partnered with another agency here, in New York City based, to be able to just provide folks with produce, and then also request donations from neighbors around.
Mm.
So we were able to feed hundreds of people over
Wow.
1,000 vegan meals by partnering with a new grassroots organization that is plant-based, Woke Foods.
Mm.
And they were amazing, just cooking the food and providing hot meals for those folks, as well as to supplement the produce that we were providing to folks. And we're getting pallets and pallets of food, and the line would be around the block. As when people found out there was food, it was amazing.
Yeah.
But the group of folks started to dwindle, and the politics remain, right? We believe in community control of land. We believe in community control of our resources, and we believe in food sovereignty for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so we realized, though, we couldn't do all the things. And as I said, people started to move away, do other projects, da da da. So we dwindled down to so few that we decided to move to another project that we were doing simultaneously, which is there's a space in Kingsbridge area called Tibbet's Tail. It's on Bailey Avenue. And it is a sliver of park, a beautiful forest sliver,
Mm.
and it's right next to the major Deegan, which is a highway, which is also an awful eyesore and really badly planned. But we can talk about that another time. But we'd been doing work in there, cleaning up the space because it had been left fallow, just left to become a dumping ground for trash. And also it was overgrown. The soil was just really in bad shape. And so we're realizing that community really needs green space, not in this kind of, ethereal kind of way, not in this theoretical way, but active green space to heal. We all know what it feels like when we get out of the city space. And even if it means still being within city space, but just being on grass or somewhere green, to look up at leaves instead of skyscrapers.
Mm-hmm.
And also recognizing too that our ecosystems, urban or not, also include non-humans. So that pathway is a flyway, a stopover for migratory species of butterflies, songbirds, and residents as well. And so the health of that forest is critical to keep this environment secure, right? And so we're doing that work. And we just pivoted to do that solely. And also, it's backbreaking work. Like literally, like my back would
Mm-hmm.
be killing me after that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a group of you know, women and non-binary folks who are doing this work.
Mm.
Let's be clear, Black and brown people made that work. Um, and there's a small group of us that cleared that space. It's blocks long. And so we did all this wonderful work, and we were gifted these planters so that we could use that soil, right? Because the soil is lead poisoned right now,
Oh, I'm
you
sure.
know,
Yeah.
and it's going to take a while to get the lead out. So we use those planters to plant berries, that would flower for the migratory butterfly species, and that would bear fruit for the birds.
Mm.
And we plan to plant much more in that area, but not just food for the non-humans, not for humans. That space is to teach people how to plant and how to grow their own food in their own space. We had such like beautiful plans for this space as well. And then also to keep a kind of a swath of the forest as is, you know, but really try to weed out some of the overgrowth to keep it healthy. Well, the Parks Department apparently didn't think that was cute. Because as soon
Mm.
as they saw that we had planters, all of a sudden they were interested in what we're doing.
Oh, wow.
We could clean up as much as we want. We could be free labor as much as we
Mm-hmm.
wanted. But the minute we're doing something different, all of a sudden, oh, you can't do that. And they locked us out of the space.
Oh, no.
Yes. And so this locking out is happening all over New York City. We
Wow.
have heard from gardeners from all over this area, from Brooklyn, from Queens, within Manhattan, other spaces in Manhattan, and here in the Bronx as well, other gardens in the Bronx where they have been locked out of their space, and all of these arbitrary reasons. No, you can't have planters. Yes, you should have planters. You can't put up a fence. No, you should have a fence. I mean, there's no real guidelines. It's more
Mm.
about keeping people out of the space, you know? And so right now, what we're really focusing on is fighting for community control of land,
Mm.
because that is the key there. I mean, we're recognizing too, want to be really clear that we don't own this land. We are on stolen land.
Mm.
We're on land that didn't belong to even the people that it was stolen from. We're on Lenape land. We know this. We are in Lenape Hoking, which is just that one way to call Lenape land. And so, we recognize that, but recognizing too that that Black and brown people have made these areas what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And Black and brown people have been fighting for community gardens for decades and have been winning. And so this new resurgence of lockouts seems to just kind of coincidentally coincide with a lot of land grabs that are happening around the city as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, completely unrelated, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And it's
So,
and it's happening all over the country in
mm,
communities where Black and brown and indigenous folks are taking the initiative to just kind of exist in those spaces on that land. And as soon as they get on the radar, suddenly it's a problem. We had an incident like that here in Baltimore, where
mm,
we actually adopted a lot. and put a community garden on it. And it's an actual like city program. And yet, once a development company decided, hey, we want to develop this particular area, all of a sudden it was like, oh, you can't plant those trees there. Oh, like we didn't know you were going to do that. Oh, and suddenly, it was a huge problem. And to the point where, they are actively engaged in taking control of these lots that they actually adopted out to individuals and groups. And so, yeah, like I definitely feel where you're coming from with that, because, land is a type of power. And I wanted to ask you about that. You talked about land, community control of land. You talked about food sovereignty. Do you feel like those kinds of things are so important?
So thank you for that question, because I think that so often we don't ask that. We just launch into, the work we're doing or other things. And the importance is when we go to grocery, I think you may have heard this too. If you talk to non-vegans, specifically meat eaters, they will say, well, my meat doesn't come from a cow. It comes from the grocery store,
Mm,
right? I've had that people say that to me, and I find it a hard time not being rude to answer
mm,
that question
mm,
or answer that statement. But the same thing is true when it comes to food. A lot of times we go to the grocery store, and that's what we know of food. That's all there is available, is what is at the grocery store. Oftentimes, that's not the best version of what should be,
mm.
right? A lot of times we go to the store, the food is irradiated. Collard greens aren't bright green,
Hmm.
y'all. They're not bright green. When they grow out of the ground, they're this rich, dark green, that feels like it's reflecting the land. And when you go to the store, oftentimes they don't look right. You just have to choose whatever's available. How about if there's no store near you?
Mm.
How about if all you have is a corner stove? What in the corner stove? How many vegetables? What they look like? How long they've been there? Where they come from? How about the fact that a lot of the times we're using fossil fuels to bring them to us? A lot of the
Mm.
times they're being picked by our cousins outside of this country who are getting tuppence, little bit of money, cents on the dollar to do backbreaking work,
Mm.
to be exposed to chemicals. How about when we as immigrants come to this country and this is the only jobs we can get, or is what we're good at because we know how to work land. And so we come in and we are also exposed to chemicals, really harsh environments, really unsafe environments, but no health care, not even lodging really. We have to live in barracks
Mm.
with maybe no heat, very bad plumbing, very unsafe for, cis women, especially. So thinking about the entire chain of food from ground to table, there's this lovely farm to table movement that does not involve most of the world, that
Mm.
does not involve those of us who are thriving or working to thrive in the margins. And so to me, food justice is bound up in sovereignty, meaning ownership of your space to grow food, access to food, good, healthy, unirradiated food, um, and also the knowledge of food. How many people really know the full breadth of vegetables that are available,
Mm.
the full breadth of fruits that exist and can grow in spaces. It also means, reparations for land, right? So when we talk about reparations, I like to think of it as repairing the community, right? Making community whole. So reparations for Black people specifically means repairing the rip that was caused when Black people were ripped out of our homeland and pitchforked into this area, right? And that's not just monetary. It's going to take serious infrastructure to repair that. But what about what happened to Earth over these centuries of mistreatment? Having small farms, having spaces where food is being grown not only helps with CO2 emissions, but it also gives people a sense of place. We just deserve joy for just joy's sake. And it's joyful to be able to pick your own food. I love that, the way my food tastes when I grow it. It's just a special kind of something, even if the bunnies get some,
Yes.
right? So those are the things that I mean, and it's so important because that is how Black people will be whole. That is how Black people will be whole. And we often, in our liberation movements, leave food out. We think of it in terms of moving food, but food is a process. And so what we need to do is disrupt the process, remember the process that existed before, and live that. And it's most important too to vegans because we know, we living on vegetables, yes? So we need to know where they come from and we need to eat the best ones.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had strawberries straight off the vine. I couldn't believe it. I could
Right?
not believe it. It's a completely different experience. It is nothing like the little plastic container that you get, at the grocery store. Those things, if they have a taste, if you are fortunate
Right.
enough to get some strawberries like in season, then they still just pale in comparison to the taste of like plucking a strawberry off a vine in a forest. Because I was like in a national forest, and there was some strawberry, but like some wild strawberries. And, first of all, I didn't even recognize them because they look different,
Right.
and then just like the taste, it's like there was just like this whole experience. It was like a sense explosion, that I just had never had from this, monocrop, like store bought, stuff. And that's not to say that, I don't appreciate being able to go into a grocery store and get food, because there have been times in my life when that was not even an option, growing up. But, it's just a completely different experience. I totally, get what you're saying. Food and Justice is proud to be partnering with Afro Vegan Society, Thrive Baltimore Community Resource Center, My Two Foods, and Better Food Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even coming from, like I said, coming from Jamaica, you know, I'm used to, you can climb the mango tree that is in your backyard
Wow.
and pick the mango. You can pick the pawpaw off of your tree. And if you don't have the pawpaw tree, guess what your neighbor going to have? Or your auntie, you
Mm,
know, or your grandmother, you know. Pineapple.
mm.
My grandmother would grow mango, pawpaw, sweet sop, sour sop, otaiti apple, pineapple, gungo peas, all
Wow.
of those things in a very small acre of land,
Mm,
along with myriad flowers,
wow.
you know? And so, like you said, it's not this monoculture. it's getting where you fit in and putting things together that work, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was a part of a team of people who, like I was saying, started the community garden. And it was so much work,
Mm,
but it was, and it's so much work, but but it's the kind of work where like you can just feel good about it.
yes,
It feels good to be out there. You feel somehow revitalized even as you're exhausted.
absolutely.
It's a completely different experience growing your own food. You're so right about that.
Mm,
Um, so you're doing all these things and working in the nonprofit sector and um sort of doing activism on different fronts. You have a vision for a collective that has a very specific mission and goal. Can you tell us about that?
yeah, absolutely. So um, the collective is called a Cypher, and you know, it's just a glorious exaltation of trans and queer Black femme reality.
Mm,
And when I say exaltation, I do mean that, just rooted in the indomitable spirit, the brilliance of, trans and queer Black femme joy. And
mm,
it's very specific in that way because we're the ones who have always been left out of spaces, but we are also the ones who have been at the forefront of movements, moving things
mm.
on the front lines, literally laying our bodies down, you know? And so
Yes.
when we think about, especially like femmes, I'm talking about those of us who are feminine, not only presenting, but feminine of center, right? So you can be feminine presenting or not, but if you're feminine of center, what often happens is patriarchy tries its very best to make sure you don't exist,
Mm,
either physically or in spaces. And so we get erased. Our work gets erased, it gets co opted, we're turned into sound bites for other people.
mm,
Um, and this work too is coming from a vegan mindset. There are so many vegan organizations out here in space. Now there's a lot more Black vegan organizations, BIPOC led organizations. That's lovely. But I haven't found any QT BIPOC space, meaning queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color spaces. Those of us in the global majority, there's always been trans and queer people. And we have not gotten a lot of resources when it comes to not only veganism, but vegan education, food justice education, true gender equity. Because when folks say gender equity, they mean the binary. They
mm-hmm.
mean the binary of gender equity meaning let's make women equal to men or give them parity in some way, but forget that has been always a spectrum of reality, and forget all of us that live again in the margins, further in the margins,
Mm-hmm.
pushed so far that we might be in the binding,
Mm,
right? Right. And I say binding because we always the glue to, right?
mm, mm-hmm.
Right. So, and people always forget about the glue till the book fall apart. And then what's he gonna do? Find more.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
So let's now find ourselves. Let's find ourselves whole with ourselves. When we talk about violence against us, we keep counting up the bodies. I would love for us to talk about violence in all the spectrum.
mm,
Talk about the fact that we don't have food to eat most of the time. Talk about the fact that, trans and queer youth, there are huge numbers of them that are homeless and are homeless, facing acts of violence, but also just out there hungry, not able to get real good food. Also, let's talk about the fact that our food education is very, very much stuck on this respectability politic that excludes trans and queer people in general, but specifically Black femmes are pushed out or meant to be in a certain space that has never fit us. And so this is the reality that, um, I would love for our collective to hold, doing education work, holding space for ourselves in sacred space, right? Learning root healing, learning our traditional ways of knowing, to keep ourselves safe, because we've always kept ourselves safe, but reminding us, right? Because it's in our blood. Some auntie somewhere, some grandma, some uncle, some grandfather, some parent, sibling, caretaker knew that, some elder knew that and taught us that. There's a reason we like ginger ale. It's because we're looking for ginger. We're looking for the healing analgesic properties to take away pain. We're looking for it to settle our stomach. We're looking for it to help with our blood pressure. We're looking for it to quench our thirst. We're looking for it to give us sweetness. This is all ancestral work that we know. This is why we say, yes, just have some ginger ale. Your leg broke, have some ginger ale. You know what I mean? Right? I mean, this is the truth, because it's and it's just, this is what we know, but we need reminding, and sometimes we need very specific space for it to hit. And so the things that we want to do is take people on hikes into the woods. How many of us have been able to do that? And then how many of us, when we do get like Black folks into the woods, are again left out because, folks don't want to see trans and queer folk in their spaces. They make us uncomfortable. That's violence in itself. And so really just railing against the notion that we can't have our things. And railing also against the notion that we don't have brilliance, and reminding folks that we've always been here, and I've always shunned through all of it, no matter what.
Well, thank you for that. And that is such an inspirational vision. And I cannot wait to see how it just all comes together and comes to fruition, because I can feel that it's already, the wheels are already moving on that. I can just, the way you speak about it, it's like it's already started, now whether this funding over here or that thing over there has materialized, that's neither here nor there, but it already is existing. And so I just cannot wait to see it. And I cannot wait to be able to support it in any way that I possibly can. So we definitely have to stay connected and stay networked for that. So.
Absolutely, sis. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. So over the course of this conversation, you've talked about non-humans quite a bit, and given your own personal perspective from your experience as a small child growing up, which is so insightful. And you and I hadn't had that conversation, so I had no idea about as a child, just crouching and watching these beings just exist in their own space for hours at a time. I mean, the insight that you must have just from that alone is just staggering to me. I wish that I had been in a situation like that. I was in sort of the opposite. If there was a polar opposite to the wonderful experience you had, growing up around nothing but asphalt, concrete, and brick, and there not being animals. around, and even the ones that were around, there was just like this antagonistic relationship between the humans in the projects and the animals that exist, that were just there trying to live just like everybody else, the roaches, the rats, um and even the animals that we found useful, that humans in general find useful, like dogs and cats, were there to work. Like there was no like familial sort of interaction. It was like, if you're a cat, you're here to be a mouser. If you're a dog, you're here to protect my property, and I'll feed you and I'll provide a place for you to stay. Maybe you might just live in the backyard, I don't know,
Right.
or in the gated in back like concrete pad. But if you're lucky, you can live inside, but you got to work for it. It didn't really foster any kind of sort of innate appreciation for nature, because there was no nature, and for the other creatures that we share this planet with. And so I came into this understanding, or like this realization of just the personhood of animals, and also the interconnectedness of like all living beings. I came into that much, much later in life. And it was really shocking when it happened. It wasn't like a gradual, beautiful thing. It was just like, what? um, but what I have definitely found in my work, that it is a delicate dance. It is a balancing act to bring these issues into into the food justice spaces in general, and even just into my social spaces. I completely lost my entire social group when I had this sort of awakening when it came to animals. All of them were just like, girl, you tripping. Like, I don't know. I don't know what you on. Like, that is not that's not what we're doing over here. Even in the the quote unquote vegan spaces, there still was like this, like, I'm choosing, to eat this way for me, but I'm totally cool with these things going on. It's just not for me. So I'm totally cool with animals, being used for food. I'm totally cool with animals in entertainment, all these, other areas in which we commodify animals. And so I was tripping. Like, I was the odd man out. Like, what is going on? We don't know what's going on with you, but we don't approve. And so I just literally had to find a whole other group of people who could relate to the changing way that I was starting to see the world. Um, and so I wanted to ask you, do you talk about those issues, like issues around animals, in, outside of these vegan circles? And if you do, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. This is always the issue, right? I absolutely do talk about that. I'm in a lot of spaces that, like I said, are for Black liberation, or are um, for land sovereignty, or are for trans and queer liberation. But uh, talking about veganism in those spaces is is coming up against walls a lot of times, because they're like, well, we out here trying to survive. They killing us. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care I don't care about them animals, And then, so what I do is I always find a way to connect it for people, to say, okay, here's what. If the killing of animals continues, guess what's gonna happen? We're still going to fall apart. Also, we're caught up in that same system. We're absolutely crunched under the same system. You know, those oppressive structures are the same. They're built on the same framework. They extend, in the same ways. And when I said we're caught up in the system, who is the one in the slaughterhouse who are exposed to all those diseases? That's Black and brown people,
Okay.
specifically those of us who have immigrated to this country,
Mm-hmm.
who are the ones who are working in the processing plants. That's us. And a lot of the times, I'll be in women's spaces, women's empowerment spaces. Like, that's women, right? So trying to make those connections to explain to people are legit dying, not just from eating too much animals, and animals in general, but let's just be clear also that there's this overconsumption that is happening that's not nobody's talking about. But also the fact that we're impacted just by being part of that system. Some human has to touch that system, and it's usually the most marginalized of us.
Mm-hmm.
Usually those of us who don't have agency, um, you know, to 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 move the system. So what we're doing is we're building agency in our community. That's also another community you need to organize. There's a whole another set of people to organize, you know, and get justice for. So that's what I do in those spaces. And that's also part of why the Cypher came about, because I was finding these issues where you go to a vegan place and it's white. When I first started doing this, I moved away from animal liberation work, direct animal liberation work, starting to do like one-on-one work with my community and like pushing veganism through these Black liberation spaces, like, you know, um, and really weaving my own practice and theories, right? And learning through others. But there was like white space. They weren't listening. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
listening. And I'd say, well, what about, like, why are you doing vegan outreach here? You're preaching to the choir over here. Are you just trying to get the easy win? You
Mm.
know? Or do you actually care about people and want everybody to go vegan? Oh, but they're not gonna listen to me. Oh, why? Because they're Black?
Mm.
Or you don't really care, actually. Um, you know? Um, and so then also in Black liberation spaces, again, coming up against this notion of, well, that's a white thing, or that's privilege. How is it privilege to eat well?
Mm.
So you calling your ancestors white? Because I mean, like, this is our ancestral diet, you know, in a lot of ways, right? Um, and so that, and then in queer space as well, hell, they didn't want no Black people there either.
Oof.
So there's that, just that. But on top of that, talking about veganism is like, okay, well, we'll have vegan options, but we're not talking about like actively doing work to dismantle all the systems of oppression,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and talking about the fact that these are sentient beings. So that's still this, just talking about non-humans as sentient beings is still always touchy. So I'll bring that up after I try to make connections with people, and then saying like, and you know what else? There's a lot of mental health issues, but people who have to deal with this systemic issue, not only from eating non-humans, right? Because if your body is going through things, so is your mind. But there's also, mental health issues from having to kill something that's looking at you in the eye and begging you not to kill them, or crying, hysterically crying,
Mm.
you know? Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I have yet to, I've asked some folks this question in the past, and I have yet to get an answer that's like, oh, it's easy. Just do it this way. It's not easy.
No.
It is not easy. There's no like quick fix to that. There's no magic, you know, pill that just, like opens the door to making these conversations easy. And you want to respect other people's right to feel the way they feel and think the way they think, and just
Right.
kind of come to a place of understanding, while also oftentimes people do not respect the way you think and the way that you feel. And so it does become a difficult dance. So I appreciate your insight on that. Um, and then I do want to ask you about I've heard you talk about the connection between gendered violence amongst humans and gendered violence against animals in the food system. Can you talk about those connections that you've made?
Yeah, you know, and I think others have made these connections too, yeah. But I remember just kind of the moment, it was kind of like what you said, where you're like, oh, wow, wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute, these are sentient beings.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, right? And so it was kind of one of those moments that it dawned on me when, I was learning more about dairy cows. And I was just like, wait a minute, these are like first of all, the first thing that dawned, like when it finally dawned on me, like they have to be pregnant. How to
Mm,
get pregnant? How do you make hundreds of hundreds of female cows? How do you make hundreds of cows pregnant? Oh my gosh. You have to force them. You have to force them to be pregnant. You have to force them to be in heat, and then you have to force them to stay pregnant. What happens to the baby? Their babies are taken away. So it made this connection to me. And then, also being a biologist, you're exposed to um just violence, language, and acts towards non-humans constantly. It's built into the system of learning about the natural world, learning about organisms. There's a lot of death and violence, murder, right?
mm,
Just straight out. And one of the things I had learned, because there's also a veterinary science that you can do specifically, right? A track that you can do for the animals in the food system.
mm,
And I remember learning just some of that stuff, like taking, I don't know, it's like a small class or something. And I started learning, and I was watching these men, just violating these cows and just being appalled by that. Um, and that's kind of really how I started making these connections. Um, and I'll also, you know, tell a quick story where I was doing biological field work in Nevada, and we were doing work with native fishes that are endangered, of extinction, endangered species, right? And this pool happened to be, it's like a hot spring. And I mean, you wouldn't even know, you'd think it was like a little ditch, right? Because it's the desert. And that's how rivers look like a lot of times in the desert, just like little trickles.
mm.
Across the street from this farm, and the cows were just standing around in the field screaming at the top of their lungs, just screaming. And why are they screaming? And I was like, this sounds so sad. What is going on? And I was looking to see if there was a man around, like beating them, or what was happening. Um, and the lead biologist, um, a cis het man. I was working mostly with cis het men, right? Cisgender heterosexual men. And he was like, oh yeah, they must have just taken the calves away.
Mm,
And it took my breath away. They were screaming for their baby.
mm,
And I had to continue to do my work, right? And I was just crying. It was like just through tears, because um, oh, I can't be soft, right? And I gotta do my work. And just thinking to myself, like the pain of not knowing where your child is, um, and making those connections between stories I'd heard, um, from survivors of violence, who had, you know, fought against their attackers and lost their children because of that, or, you know, who have fallen on hard times and lost their children because of that, or, you know, people who are children in the system. And those, all of a sudden, those connections clicked, for me, and realizing that these systems are very, very similar in the way that they work, because they're meant specifically to, it's easy to say the word oppress, but it feels more right to say annihilate,
Mm.
you know, um, because spiritually, physically, when these systems are created, it is never really for the greater good. It is to contain and remove,
Mm.
you know. So, and it's a system of policing as well. So when we think about abolitionist movements, and I do consider myself an abolitionist, or even maybe a budding abolitionist, because I believe that I'm always learning the best ways, and always learning the ways in which I may be buying into systems, into carceral systems. So recognizing too, that, um, non-humans are caught up in these carceral systems as well. That's what these pens are. That's what these factory farms are.
Mm.
Um, these systems that are specifically meant to annihilate, but also to kind of create automatons, right? We think about the cogs in the wheel,
Mm.
um, and or cogs in a machine, but so it's a system of automation, turning female bodies, you know, bodies that can produce life, hold life, into into units of production, period, and
Mm.
nothing else. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Turning these female bodies into units of production. My goodness. I mean, that's exactly what it is, you know? Um, and so I wanted to just hold space for that for a moment because, you know, well,
Yeah. It's heavy. It's heavy to think
it
about.
is. It is. It is. Much heavier when you have decided to try to push back against it.
Hmm.
Um, I oftentimes think about just how easily people must sleep at night, even knowing that these things exist, but having made the decision that they weren't going to try to do anything about it,
Yeah.
just must not be losing any sleep whatsoever. Um, as opposed to
Yeah.
us. If we get a full night's sleep, every once in a while it's an accomplishment. But
Mm. Mm.
I want to just thank you so much for joining me on this show, for giving me an opportunity to just give other people a chance to hear your brilliance and your passion and everything that makes you who you are. I just so appreciate you just as a person, and as a person in my life who has already just been such a treasure. And so I'm just so honored that you have come onto the show and just blessed us all with your presence. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, you're truly a gift, and I am grateful just every time that we get to connect in any way, large or small. Um, and I just love the fact that you're the one hosting this. I love the fact that this exists through you, because of you. I just love all the work you're doing, and I'm always here to support as well. It's a mutual admiration society.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the, folks who have joined us for this episode. You are the reason why I do this. So, tune in again for the next installment of the Food and Justice podcast. And until then, take care. This has been the Food and Justice podcast with Brenda Sanders. Join me next week as I talk with Marvin Hayes, founder of the Baltimore Compost Collective. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and share it. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell to request all notifications. Or if you're on Facebook, please like and share the video, like our page, and invite your friends. You can also subscribe to the show as a podcast via our website at fjpodcast.com. Support the show. Visit our website to find out how you can become a patron. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next week.